Hello, and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain the Bible one chapter at a time. My name is Luke, and I am thy host. And today's chapter is Genesis 26. Let's read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Genesis 26 has 35 verses. Let's go ahead and read the chapter. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you, for to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." For he feared to say, "my wife," thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought, lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this that you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also, so he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath his advisor and Phicol the commander of his army, Isaac said to him, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So that is the text of Genesis chapter 26. And as we mentioned in a previous chapter, if you're feeling a little bit of deja vu here, don't worry. You're not going crazy. We see that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Isaac is repeating some actions that his father Abraham did. These are some tactics, not so wise tactics, that Abraham used a couple different times. And Isaac evidently learned this from his father, and now he's doing it as well. So there's a ton of similarities between this story and two other stories that we've now read from Abraham's past. We'll talk about that more as we go through our outline section, but let's jump back and do just a little bit of a reminder of context. Let's just jump back 2 chapters or so, look at chapter 24 and 25 to remind ourselves of where we've been. So in the beginning of chapter 24, we're told that Abraham is getting very old and he's worried about his son Isaac. He needs a wife. He needs a wife so that he can have children and God's promise can be fulfilled to make Abraham's descendants into a great nation. Abraham doesn't just want to get a wife from anywhere, though, so he sends a servant all the way up hundreds of miles to the north to where Nahor, Abraham's brother, lives. And there, Abraham's servant finds this beautiful young woman named Rebekah, and he brings Rebekah back, and she becomes Isaac's wife. We then open up the pages of chapter 25, and we have the death of Abraham. Abraham dies at 175 years old. We've now been following him for 13 chapters or so, and finally he dies at a very, very old age. The text says that he's full of days, that he had lived a good life, and then he was gathered to his people, or gathered to his fathers, which is a very Bible-y way to talk about dying. We then read about Isaac and Rebekah trying to have children but being unable because Rebekah is barren. But after Isaac prays for Rebekah to the Lord allows her to have children, and she has 2 children, Jacob and Esau. And we talk to the end of chapter 24 about how they grow up and how there's this situation where Esau is coming back from hunting. And evidently he hasn't caught anything or he hasn't killed anything. He's starving. He's very hungry. And Jacob kind of takes advantage of the situation, and he gets his older brother Esau to sell him his birthright, his double portion of the inheritance, for a bowl of soup. At the end of chapter 25, we talked about how that reveals some of the character of these 2 boys. Esau is a fool for selling his birthright, and Jacob is deceptive and willing to take advantage of people. But as we open up the pages of 26, we're going to return now a little bit to Isaac and Rebekah. We're not going to fully focus on Jacob and Esau quite yet. We're going to talk a little bit more about Isaac and Rebekah. So let's now go to our PDF, which concisely summarizes all the key details of this chapter. You can download it for free on our website at tobelikechrist.com. Also, if you want all 50 outlines already pre-prepared for you in a physical book, you can buy that physical book on Amazon. There'll be links down in the description to where you can find those things. Let's go ahead now and look at our first section. The first thing we want to discuss is when these events happened in history. So Isaac is born about 1900 years before Jesus comes on the scene. This would be about 1896 BC, and he married Rebekah when he was 40 years old. Isaac lived to be 180 years old, and he dies around 1716 BC. So the events that are recorded in chapter 26 occurred sometime between Isaac's 40th birthday and his death, but almost certainly towards the beginning of that period. Our key characters are going to change a little bit in this chapter because we don't have Abraham here, but we do have Isaac. This is Abraham's son and the husband of Rebekah. He was blessed by God and becomes very rich in this chapter. He was already rich because he inherited Abraham's house, but now he becomes even more rich. We have Rebekah, this is Isaac's wife, and the mother of Jacob and Esau, who we discussed in the last chapter. We have Abimelech, the ruler of Gerar and the king of the Philistines. And I'll mention here, as I mentioned previously, when Abraham encountered Abimelech, that this is not a proper name. This is a title of a ruler, it seems like, kind of like Caesar or Pharaoh. There were many Caesars, many pharaohs. It's not just a reference to one specific person in history. So Abimelech was seemingly the title that was received by the rulers who ruled over this area of Gerar. If I'm not mistaken, these events with Isaac and Abimelech take place about 90 years after the events of Abraham and Abimelech, 90 to 100 years. So this is almost certainly not the same Abimelech who we're talking about in this chapter as we talked about previously. And then our final group of characters is the herdsmen of Gerar. They were constantly arguing with Isaac over the property rights to the wells that his servants were digging. Now we move down to our where section to our map. In Genesis chapter 26, Isaac's family lived in the area of Gerar before later settling in Beersheba. I have a kind of general area outlined for Gerar. I'm not sure that anyone knows its exact location or boundaries, but we do know that this was the territory of the Philistines, who traditionally occupied the land to the south of Canaan along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. With that introduction information out of the way, we can now move to our outline section. I've got this chapter broken down into 5 different sections for better comprehension, and we'll go through them one by one. Our first section is going to be verses 1 through 5, God's promises to Isaac and to his family. So there was a famine in the land of Canaan. This is really similar to the story of Abraham. Remember, Abraham got driven down into Egypt because there was a famine in the land of Canaan. But in this instance, God tells Isaac not to go down to Egypt, but to dwell in the land that he promised to his father Abraham. So God says, don't leave this land. I have promised to give you this land, to make it your homeland. Don't leave it on, or for the sake of this famine. I am going to take care of you. And so God's asking him to have a little bit of faith. Maybe Egypt was a bit safer, a bit more secure. Maybe they had better food supply or something. Probably the Nile River helped them out quite a bit with that. Isaac's tempted to go down there, and God says, no, believe me that I'm going to take care of you if you stay in this land that I've promised to give you. And then we see God reaffirming the promises that he'd made to Abraham to Isaac. Isaac is told that his offspring are going to be multiplied like the stars of the heavens, and he's also told that in them all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. So they're going to become a great nation, and somehow, some way, Isaac doesn't know exactly how yet, his descendants are going to bless the whole world. And we've talked about how that is going to happen through Jesus, who's a descendant of Abraham and Isaac. Jesus comes, dies for the sins of the whole world, and blesses people with the opportunity to receive God's grace and salvation. So that's chapter 1. Isaac wants to go to Egypt, and God says, nope, stay put. Everything's going to be fine. So that's section number 1. Isaac's tempted to go down to Egypt, but God says, no, stay put. I'm going to take care of you here. This leads us into section number 2, which is verses 6 through 11. Isaac lies to Abimelech. And this is the deja vu section. This is the section where Isaac basically carbon copies the actions of his father, and he repeats them. And these are not wise actions, as he will be rebuked by Abimelech for doing what he does. Isaac settles in Gerar. To his credit, he believes God, and he has faith that God's going to take care of him, so he settles there. But he had this fear that his father had. Sarah had been a very beautiful woman, and Abraham was always worried about other men killing him and taking Sarah. Well, Rebekah, Isaac's wife, is also a beautiful woman, so he has the same fear, seemingly somewhat of an irrational fear, at least for this part of the world. He was afraid that the men of Gerar were going to kill him and take his wife because she was so attractive. So he lies, and he tells her to tell everybody that she's just his sister. Now, in the case of Abraham, this was kind of like a half lie, half truth, because Sarah was actually Abraham's half sister. So she was indeed, in a way, his sister. But Rebekah is not even Isaac's half sister. So this is even a worse lie than what Abraham was trying to get away with. But he uses the same tactic out of his father's playbook, and we're going to see how it goes with his and what it does to his relationship with Abimelech and the people of the land. One day, Abimelech, the king of Gerar, is looking out his window, and the text says that he sees Isaac and Rebekah laughing together. I think some of the older translations say sporting together. And whatever is being suggested by the text here, whatever Abimelech saw, it was clear to him that Isaac and Rebekah were more than just brother and sister. This was more than just a sibling bond between them. Evidently, it was something to suggest there were some romantic associations between them. And so he is tipped off to the fact that perhaps Isaac has not really been honest with him. Rebekah is actually his wife. And so he rebukes Isaac. He confronts him about this, and he rebukes him because he says, you've put our community in danger because your wife is very attractive. If any of the men of my community had gone up to her and had relations with her, our whole community would be under the curse of God because you weren't upfront with us about your relationship with her. So why did you do this? And Isaac says, just like Abraham before him, well, I was worried that you would kill me if I disclosed that she was my wife. I was worried that someone was just going to, finish me off and take her for themselves. It's interesting here, again, we see that Abimelech and evidently the people of his community are not these, violent predators that Isaac and his father assume them to be, but actually they're pretty God-fearing people who respect the sacred union of marriage. And Abimelech then has to make a decree to all of his people that no one is allowed to touch Sarah or Isaac or they're going to be put to death. So we see Abimelech protecting them, even though Isaac has lied to him. Abimelech still takes actions to protect them and to make sure nobody is going to touch Rebekah moving forward. It's interesting to me that even though these people of Gerar, the Philistines, that they're not God's special chosen people in the same way that Abraham is, they still have this really high regard for the union of marriage. And they know that that is not a union that's supposed to be violated. No man should be having any kind of relationship with another man's wife. And I'm assuming that respect for marriage is something that is instilled in people because of the creation and perhaps because of some other instructions that God had given to people about the way that marriage was supposed to be treated. So even though these aren't technically God's people and we don't have any of the specific revelations or instructions that God gave to this specific people group, still they honor and respect marriage to a very high degree. And that's certainly something that our culture and the cultures of the modern day would do well to mimic. Now we move down into section number 3. This is verses 12 through 25, titled Disputes About Water and Wells. So Isaac was blessed by the Lord, and he becomes very, very rich. It says that he sows and he reaps 100-fold. So he's just doing really, really well for himself. Well, not really for himself. God is blessing him with these riches. He's so rich and he's so powerful that Abimelech asks him to leave Gerar because he's kind of a source of envy, and he's also maybe a threat in some people's eyes because he's richer, he's more powerful than any of the people there. And we find out that Isaac kind of takes offense to this, to being asked to leave. But he goes, he leaves, and he settles in the valley of Gerar, and there his servants dig a well for water. And when they finish the well, the herdsmen of Gerar, they start bickering with Isaac's servants because they say, well, this land is ours, and therefore this water is ours, and now that you've dug this well, it belongs to us. And rather than fighting with them, Isaac certainly seems like he would have been capable of doing that with his very robust household. He moves on. The servants proceed then to dig another well, but the herdsmen also bicker over that one. Isaac's household then moved on and dug a third well, and on this third attempt, the herdsmen just leave him alone. And then we're told that Isaac goes to Beersheba, and there the Lord speaks to him and once again reaffirms the promises to him that he had given to his father Abraham. And in response, a response of worship, Isaac erects an altar there and worships God. That section is a good chunk of the chapter. I think it's pretty straightforward, though I don't have a lot of comments on it. I do think it's interesting that Isaac names the wells. He gives them like proper names and to mark their significance and to mark kind of what they symbolized in his life. I just found that interesting because we don't do that a whole lot today as far as naming objects that are significant or mark a particular season or experience in our life. Let's now talk about section number 4. This is verses 26 through 33. Isaac and Abimelech make a treaty, and once again, this is something that we saw the other Abimelech who came before and Abraham doing in the past, but now these actions are basically going to be repeated now that new characters are on the scene. Abimelech and his military officers recognize how the Lord is blessing Isaac. He calls him the blessed of the Lord, and he proposes a treaty of peace between Isaac's household and his own. And initially, when Abimelech and his men come to Isaac, Isaac's kind of, he's still a little bit bitter, it seems like, about Abimelech telling him to leave Gerar and go settle somewhere else. He said, why are you coming to me? You previously told me to go away. And Abimelech says, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you, so we said, let's make a sworn pact between us, between you and us. Let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." That's verses 28 and 29. And so Isaac is willing to kind of put the past behind them, and he is willing to make this pact, this peace treaty. So Isaac makes a feast, and in the morning the two parties exchange their oaths before parting ways. So that's kind of the end of the story of Isaac and Rebekah in Gerar and their dealings with Abimelech, at least for now. We now have the last two verses of the chapter that tell us a little bit more about Esau, who is the oldest son of Isaac and Rebekah. You remember there's Esau and then there's Jacob. And we talked about how there's going to be a lot of tension between Esau and Jacob. And we talked a little bit about the character of Esau being a foolish man who sells his birthright for something of very little value, a bowl of lentil stew. Here we see Esau's character on display a little bit more in his poor decisions in choosing wives. So this is verses 34 and 35 to close out the chapter, and I've just entitled it Esau's Wives. When Esau was 40 years old, he married two Hittite women, Judith and Basemath. Their union, the text says, made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Now, why did this marriage make life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah? Well, the Hittite women were the people of the land. The people of this land that eventually Isaac and his descendants were going to inherit and to make their own and to fill and populate, but they hadn't done that yet, right? And so these Hittite women are the women who have lived there and grown up there to these households and to these nations that don't share the same values as Isaac and Rebekah and Abraham and Sarah. You think of the pain that Abraham went through in sending his servant hundreds of miles to the north to the city of Nahor, his brother, to find a wife for Isaac, because Abraham insisted that he did not want Isaac marrying one of the women of the land, one of the Canaanite women or the Hittite women. But now, rather than respecting that family legacy and tradition and that good practice of marrying a woman who shares your values and shares your God, Esau has gone and just married two, random women from Canaan, from another nation, who are, maybe pagans, maybe idol worshipers, who knows? We don't know all the details here, but they're not from this family. And so that's going to be a source of bitterness for Isaac and Rebekah, and it's going to cause problems and strain in the relationship between really Isaac and Rebekah and also Jacob and Esau. And so Esau is not really starting off well here, and the Bible doesn't give us a lot to think highly of him as it introduces us to him in the book of Genesis. And as we read throughout the rest of the Bible, and even some statements in the New Testament, it's clear that God didn't really think very highly of Esau. So that's going to do it for our summary of Genesis chapter 26. That is the end of the chapter. Let's, of course, as always, finish off with an application from chapter 26. Abraham and Isaac's story is like our own in a lot of ways. They were constantly traveling from place to place as nomads, as they were waiting for the Lord to fulfill his promise to give them a land of their own. They didn't really have a home, and so they're constantly moving, and they're nomadic people. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9, it says, "By faith, Abraham went to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land." It's talking about Canaan there. He goes to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. There's a sense in which Christians are also pilgrims and nomads. We sojourn on earth for a time in anticipation of one day receiving a permanent home that God has promised us in heaven. And just as it was going to be a great day when Abraham's descendants finally got that land of Canaan and made it their own and didn't have to be nomadic anymore, it's going to be a great day when we finally get to put our luggage and our burdens down in a place that we can call home for eternity. You may have heard that song that's sung in a lot of Christian churches. "This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue." This isn't our home. This isn't where we're staying. We're not setting down on our roots here as if we're going to live forever. We're nomads and strangers and pilgrims on the earth, waiting for God to fulfill his promises to us that one day he's going to give us an eternal home. So thanks for studying along with me in Genesis chapter 26. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Genesis 27. Until then, have a fantastic day.